Hello, everyone. In this video, we will be discussing how to develop research questions and hypotheses for quantitative studies. Now, when we talk about research questions in the quantitative studies context, there are three things or three functions that research questions can do. First is that they can help explain relationships between variables. Second is that they can help focus on comparisons, and the last one is that they can help narrow the study's scope, okay, and provide direction for the analysis. So, for the first function, we're focusing here on relationships between variables. Now, a variable is simply something that can change or vary. It could be something like age, income level, or, for example, someone's level of job satisfaction. So, an example of a research question that would highlight this function is, for instance, does the amount of time spent on social media affect students' academic performance? So, in a question like this, we're exploring a possible relationship between two variables, and that is time on social media, and the other variable is academic performance. So, a question like this aims to see if a change in social media time is connected to a change in the other variable, which is academic performance. Now, another thing we can do with quantitative research questions is make comparisons. For example, let's say we want to study job satisfaction across different departments in a company. Now, maybe comparing the marketing team with, let's say, the finance team. Our research question can be something like, is there a difference in job satisfaction levels between the marketing and finance departments? So, this is a comparison question because we're looking to see if there is a measurable difference between the two groups. Then we have correlations, which are about associations that you can make between variables. Imagine we're interested in whether there's a connection between hours of exercise per week and stress levels in college students. So, a question might look like, is there an association between the amount of weekly exercise and stress levels in college students? So, this is a correlation question because we're not looking for a cause effect relationship, but rather if changes in one variable relate to changes in another. So, in the end, a well designed research question can help narrow down our focus and it can set a clear direction for the quantitative study. They also can tell us exactly what we're testing and what kind of analysis we'll be doing, whether we're comparing groups or we're finding correlations. So, this approach makes it easier to carry out a study that's not only clear, but also valuable, as we can directly analyze the relationships and see what the data reveals. So now that we've covered research questions and how they set the focus, let's talk about hypotheses. Hypotheses take things a step further by making specific predictions about the relationships that we are interested in. Now, essentially, a hypothesis is our best guess. It's a guess that is based on prior knowledge, based on theory, or based on observations. So they're also about how variables might be connected. For example, let's say we're working with that earlier example on social media use and academic performance. So our hypothesis for that example could be increased time spent on social media will lead to lower academic performance in students. In this hypothesis, we're predicting not only that there is a relationship between the two variables, but also the nature of that relationship. Okay, so this is what we call a directional hypothesis. So we're stating that as one variable increases, which is time on social media, the other, which is academic performance, is expected to decrease. So this is like what I said is an example of directional hypothesis. So a directional hypothesis gives us a clear expectation of which way the relationship might go. So it's not only about uncovering a significant relationship between two variables, but it will specifically tell us also whether that relationship is increasing, if it's a positive relationship, if one change in variable increases the if an increase in one variable leads to an increase in the other variable, that's a positive relationship. Or if it's a negative relationship wherein an increase in one variable leads to a decrease in another variable. So take note again, when we say directional hypothesis, you're not only stating that a relationship is significant, but you're also providing some type of hint on what kind of relationship to expect, whether it's positive or it is negative. So it provides that direction, hence directional hypothesis. But we might sometimes also make a non directional hypothesis. And in a non directional hypothesis, we simply predict a relationship without actually specifying the nature or the direction. So, again, let's use the job satisfaction example. A non directional hypothesis for that example can be there is a difference in job satisfaction levels between the marketing and finance departments. So, in this example, we're not stating which department has higher or lower satisfaction, right? We're not providing that direction. We're just simply saying that we can expect to see a difference between the job satisfaction of these two departments. So, in that example, this can be described as a non directional hypothesis. Now, once we have hypotheses, we test them statistically, and this allows us to confirm or refute our predictions. For example, if we conduct a study on social media time and academic performance and find that more time on social media indeed correlates with lower grades, we now have evidence to support our hypothesis. On the other hand, if the data does not show a significant connection, then our hypothesis is not supported. So, hypotheses are valuable because they don't just help us explore relationships, but they allow us to draw conclusions based on statistical evidence. So they give us a structured way to analyze data and ultimately add depth and credibility to our research by moving from general questions to precise and testable predictions in the form of hypotheses. Now, this way, the study not only gains clarity but also it contributes meaningful insights based on the measurable outcomes. Writing strong quantitative research questions and hypotheses is so important because it defines the study's focus and direction. And so it helps the study to clarify what is being tested. So, clear and well structured questions and hypotheses guide data collection and analysis. And so they make it easier to draw meaningful evidence based conclusions, and they also help enhance the study's overall credibility. So, now let's discuss some guidelines for how to write good quantitative research questions and hypotheses. We start with the importance of clearly stating variables. So, variables are the building blocks of a quantitative study, and identifying them clearly is essential to keep our research focused and easy to understand. When we say state variables clearly, we're referring to identifying and defining the independent, dependent, and any mediating or moderating variables in our research question or hypothesis. So, again, you are to state these variables in the research question as well as the hypothesis. So, let's break down what these terms mean using a familiar example. So imagine that we are studying whether, again, exercise impacts stress levels among college students. In this example, the independent variable or the variable that we believe is going to cause a change is exercise, or more specifically, the amount of weekly exercise. So this is the factor we think might have an effect on something else. And this something else is now the dependent variable or the outcome that we are measuring, which is stress level. So, in our hypothesis, given these identified independent variable and dependent variable, we might say something like increased weekly exercise will reduce stress levels in college students. And that would now become an example of a hypothesis. Now, sometimes studies include also mediating variables, which are variables that may influence the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. For instance, let's say we want to look further into how sleep quality might play a role in the relationship between exercise and stress. So, we might hypothesize that exercise improves sleep quality, which in turn reduces stress. So, here in this example, sleep quality is a mediating variable because it provides a pathway explaining how exercise reduces stress. So, by defining these variables clearly upfront in your research question and your hypothesis, we set clear expectations for the study and ensure that everyone, including from the research team to the readers of the paper, that they understand exactly what you are investigating in that study or paper. So, this clarity is crucial because it keeps the study focused and it makes it easier to communicate findings in a precise and accurate way. So, properly defining variables is like laying a solid foundation for a house. So, in just as you would with a house, it's very important that you lay um, a good, solid groundwork that can keep everything else stable and well structured. Now, another key guideline for crafting strong quantitative research questions and hypotheses is to include a theory. So, using a theory as a foundation gives our research context and it strengthens our hypothesis by linking them to established knowledge. Now, when we frame our hypothesis within an established theory, we're not just making a prediction in isolation, right? So, when we make predictions in our hypothesis, we're not just thinking these predictions up, we're not just imagining them. They are based on some evidence that we have culled from the literature, or it can be based on the established theory that we are working with for that study. So instead, we're grounding the paper. When we're using a theory, we're grounding it in a broader understanding of how things work, or based on prior research and evidence. Now, for example, let's go back to our exercise and stress. If we wanted to frame the study within a theoretical context, um, for example, we might use the stress buffering theory. Okay, so this theory suggests that certain behaviors like physical activity can help protect people from the negative effects of stress by by increasing resilience and reducing stress responses. So in that case, we have selected a specific theory and we are now ensuring that our predictions, which are found in the hypothesis, are based off of this theory. So, by aligning our hypothesis within this theory, we're not just guessing that exercise might reduce stress. We are drawing on a recognized concept in psychology to support our prediction. So, our hypothesis, increased weekly exercise will reduce stress levels in college students, now has more weight because it's backed up by a theory that explains why exercise should have this effect. Now, in many fields, especially social sciences, theories provide frameworks that have been tested and validated over time. Using them as a foundation gives researchers a logical basis for their predictions and it connects their study to a larger body of research. And it also allows others to see where your study fits within the field and understand its significance more readily when you use a theory. Let's talk now about descriptive versus relationship questions. So, this distinction helps us determine whether we're simply observing characteristics of one variable or exploring connections between multiple variables. So, first, descriptive questions are all about understanding the characteristics of a single variable, right? Think of these as questions that provide like a snapshot or description of one aspect of what we are studying. For example, if we wanted to look at exercise habits among college students, a descriptive question might be: how many hours per week do college students spend exercising? So, in this example, we're not exploring relationships. We're trying or we're trying to even link exercise with any other factor. What we're simply doing is we are gathering straightforward information about the variable exercise hours. Descriptive questions are very useful when you're in the early stages of understanding a topic or want to establish baseline data about one variable. Uh, on the other hand, relationship questions are where we start exploring potential links between two or more variables. So these questions are particularly valuable when we want to see if changes in one variable are associated with changes in another variable. So, for example, if we're interested in how exercise might affect stress levels, a relationship question could be: is there an association or is there a relationship between the amount of weekly exercise and reported stress levels among college students? So, in this example, we're clearly examining a if there is we're clearly examining if there is a pattern that connects these two variables. Relationship questions are fundamental in quantitative research because they often lead to testing hypotheses about cause and effect or about correlation. Continuing with our guidelines, we now discuss the alternative and null hypothesis. So, these two hypotheses are central to most quantitative research because they define what we're testing and help guide our statistical analysis. So, let's start with the null hypothesis or the H0. And by the way, the zero here should be a subscript. The null hypothesis is our default assumption, quote unquote, default assumption. So when we say default assumption, it means that it predicts that there is no relationship or no difference between the variables that we are studying. In other words, a null hypothesis assumes that any observed effects are simply due to chance and not an actual relationship between the variables. For example, if we're looking at the relationship again between exercise and stress levels, the null hypothesis would be there is no association between the amount of exercise and stress levels in college students. So, in this example, we're saying that according to the null hypothesis, exercise does not have any measurable impact on stress. And that if any relationship exists, it would be just because of some random variation. The alternative hypothesis, which is the H1, and 1 is also denoted as a subscript, or it should be denoted as a subscript, the alternative hypothesis, on the other hand, is what we're actually interested in testing. Okay, so this hypothesis predicts a significant relationship between variables, and it often includes a direction. So, if we expect that exercise has a positive effect on reducing stress, our alternative hypothesis might be increased weekly exercise will lead to lower stress levels in college students. So, note how in the alternative hypothesis, we explicitly stated that it indeed will lead to some change in the other variable. Okay, so you are affirming a significant relationship. So, in again in this example, we're not only saying that a relationship exists, but we're also specifying what we think that relationship will look like. And that is, again, in this example, it would be a positive relationship. The increase in one variable leads to the increase in another. One of the main reasons we formulate these two hypotheses is because in statistical testing, we work to see if we can reject the null hypothesis in favor of the alternative. So let's say we conduct our study and find that students who do exercise more indeed have lower stress levels. So in this outcome, in this outcome, we can provide evidence to reject the null hypothesis and support the alternative hypothesis, which suggests that exercise does help lower stress. By the way, let me just briefly go back to this part where I said that the relationship that is being described in the alternative hypothesis, specifically on the example between exercise and lower stress, is not a positive relationship. It is a negative relationship. So let me just correct myself, because negative, because an increase in the exercise will lead to a decrease in the stress levels. So that is the negative relationship that is being described here by this alternative hypothesis. So it's important to remember that rejecting the null hypothesis does not mean proving that the alternative hypothesis is absolutely true. Okay. So rather, it means that we have enough statistical evidence to suggest that a relationship likely exists in the direction we predicted. So, framing hypothesis this way allows us to approach the research question objectively, knowing that either outcome, whether it's the null or the alternative, can provide valuable insights. Finally, it is highly recommended that you use also directional words in quantitative research questions and hypothesis. These words, such as effect, influence, predict, impact, determine, cause, and relate. They're really more than just verbs. They are there because they help set clear expectations for the relationships we are investigating and add precision to our hypothesis. So, using directional words gives our hypothesis focus by specifying how we think one variable will act upon the other. Okay, so for example, instead of a vague statement like exercise and stress are connected, right? When you say that, that's an example of a vague statement. A hypothesis with directional wording would look more like this: increased weekly exercise reduces stress levels in college students. So here, the word reduces directly indicates our expected effect, which is that exercise is hypothesized to have a decreasing influence on stress. So this not only makes our prediction clearer, but also sets up a straightforward test for our analysis, as we're looking for a particular direction in the relationship. So, directional words are especially important in hypothesis testing because they define what we're looking to prove or disprove. Words like cause or determine are typically used in experimental research where we have control over variables and can test cause and effect relationships. On the other hand, words like predict or relate might be more appropriate in observational studies. Okay, where we are observing natural connections without manipulating the variables. So, an example of this would be like a survey, a study that is mainly based on survey.